Chapter 1. The Styx. "She's beautiful," Detective Trent remarked as he stared down at the pale form of the young woman before him. Her blonde hair and dark clothes were soaked with dirty water, but her skin was still soft and white, her lips a pale blue, giving her an even more ethereal quality. They were pouting slightly with the way the blood vessels had been swollen by the icy water. "They always are," Detective Duggan sighed, watching Trent take one final drag on his cigarette before dropping it into the depths of the river before him. He was right, of course. They always looked beautiful when they were dead, because they weren't really people anymore. You didn't know them, know their sins, their crimes, their thoughts. The ice-cold waters of the river had baptized them, washed away the amassed sins of a life lived in the city, leaving them clean and innocent and beautiful. Always beautiful. The river ran straight through the middle of the city, separating the rich side from the poor. To see it on a map, it looked like God had drawn a thick black line through the societal plan, keeping the dogs away from their masters. Up close, there wasn't much difference between one side of that line and the other, except that pimps and crack whores were replaced with corrupt bankers and high-class call girls. Poor filth and rich filth, separated by an expanse of ebony water. You lived here long enough, you learned that. If the filth from the east side made enough money to get across the river, then they'd join the filth in the west side. No one ever left the city once they'd arrived. It wouldn't let them. "Who do you think she was?" Trent asked as he looked down again at the frozen face of the dead girl. "She can't be older than 19, and she's wearing a designer bracelet," Duggan remarked, crouching next to the body. "Only one place a girl on this side of the city gets money like that, and it's the same place she'd get that bruise on her wrist." "She's a hooker," Trent nodded. "She was," Duggan sighed. "Now she's just another one for the morgue." "You think she drowned?" "No. Shot in the chest," Duggan replied, opening the young girl's sodden blouse slightly to reveal the bullet wound above her heart. The fact that there was no blood or bullet hole in the blouse suggested a poor attempt to hide the wound. Someone was rushing. "That's quite a shot to make." "Unless you're up close, which means there's a good chance she knew the guy. Probably argued with him, pleaded and begged, and he shot her anyway." "You think she forgot to pay her pimp?" Trent suggested. "I don't know. Seems unlikely." "What makes you say that?" "Look at her clothes, the jewelry. Girl doesn't make that kind of money her first year on the streets, Trent. She's experienced, been in the game a while. Forgetting to pay her boss isn't something she'd suddenly start to do." "Maybe she got overconfident, tried to leave town and he wouldn't let her?" "Where would she go? Besides, classy or not, she's still dressed like a tramp. She wasn't going anywhere nice tonight, just out to the streets." "So we got a mystery on our hands, huh?" "When you're a detective, they call it a case, Trent. Hey, quit with the smart mouth, wise ass. I've been on the force longer than you." "Yeah, how could I forget that?" Duggan muttered, standing up from the body. "Wait for the meat wagon to pick her up. I'm calling it a night." Trent took his tarnished silver hip flask and knocked it back, letting its contents hit his throat like ice water. He coughed a little and then relaxed as he swallowed it down. It wasn't the body. He'd seen enough of them that nothing shocked him. Not kids, not women. Nothing fazed him now. It was the cold, the rain. The city never seemed to shake it off, whatever the season. Trent wasn't even certain what season it was about now. He was sure that he'd seen some Christmas lights being set up, but they put the damn things out in September now, so who can tell? Winter would bring snow instead of rain, but the cold would stay. Trent resigned himself to this and brought up the collar on his gray coat, watching his breath as it drifted away into the night before his eyes. Duggan walked on down the banks of the Styx. The river had earned that name so long ago that no one could remember what it was actually called. It was a name that had been earned in the blood of everyone whose corpse had sank to the bottom of it, a debt paid 1,000 times over, an account that would be forever in credit. Duggan could remember a body being dragged from it at least once every couple of months for as long as he'd been on the force, which was approaching 2 decades now. There were probably more down there beneath the black mire that blocked any light from penetrating past 3 or 4 feet of water. Rotting bodies, food for whatever fish could survive down there, long past seeing the light and wondering if their families even knew they were gone. The girl who'd washed up on the shore tonight wasn't even the youngest Duggan had seen. There had been 2 kids, each aged 12, who'd been strangled and tied together at the waist. They'd never found who did that, or why, and that haunted Duggan more than the dead faces of those damn kids. Not having an answer taunted him. He couldn't let things go. To have the devil standing right there in front of him, holding a piece of paper with the answer written in invisible ink, it ate away at his gut, left a burning feeling of emptiness and rage inside that nothing would quell. Carl Duggan liked answers. To leave a question without one was a pain that wouldn't die. The corpses still at the bottom of the Styx might never have their answers found. They didn't even have names anymore. Duggan didn't think about them, as that way madness lay. Tonight his focus was on the girl. His shift was over. It was time to return home. But still, his thoughts were on the latest victim of the city's cruel will. A city where the young die, and no one ever lived long enough to claim Social Security. It was like some form of purgatory with a constant turnover of its residents. The only people who stayed here past a couple of years were the cops and the career criminals. Everyone else died young. No one ever left, not once the city had marked you. It was like a disease, an infection of sin that rots you from the inside out. Once it's in your soul, it's going nowhere, and neither are you. You'll just take it with you, spread it wherever you go. The darkness, the soul-crushing misery, the cold, and the rain. Better to stay here, quarantined within the city limits. Let the darkness and the filth and the cold eat away at those who've chosen that fate. But keep it here, where it belongs. 2 halves of a dirt-covered coin separated by a river of blood. The walk home wasn't a long one, but Carl took it slow. He liked to walk. It cleared his head. Let him mull over his thoughts before he got home. Once he unlocked his front door and stepped inside, he liked to leave the city behind him. Turn the lights on, drink some coffee that didn't taste like pig crap, and sit down in a chair that wasn't 40-year-old hard plastic. An escape, a refuge, somewhere to leave the dark and the cold behind for a while. It never went completely away, of course, not with the neon sign whose pink glow taunted the gap between his bedroom curtains. It used to read Jesus Saves, but now it simply said Save. The sign broke years back and was never fixed. Who would bother? Not like anyone in the city wants to read that message, nor that they ever did. Hope needed light and warmth to spread, and there was precious little to be found here. Maybe in the arms of a hooker for half an hour, but even that would cost you your cash and your soul. A heavy price to empty your sack into a stranger, but there was never a shortage of those who wanted to pay it. Everyone needs joy, wherever it's to be found, whatever the cost. Line up for eternal damnation. Smile at the devil as he takes your picture. The third stair on the way up to Carl's apartment creaked beneath his shoe, as it did whenever he walked on it. Every time he heard that noise, he contemplated telling the superintendent, but decided against it. Surly men like that don't care about creaking steps. They just want to change the light bulbs and go home. Maybe mop the floors if they're feeling adventurous. If nothing else, the creaking step would always serve to alert the cheating wife in the flat above Carl's every time her husband was on his way home. It was like a tripwire that might just give this week's lover enough time to dress and make for the fire escape. She was a toothless crack whore who'd long since lost whatever looks she might have once had, but Carl had heard she'd take it in any hole you could fit it, so perhaps that explained her popularity. By the time his hand reached the doorknob, the thoughts of the creaking step had been forgotten, just as they did every day. Carl looked at his watch and noticed that it was past 2 in the morning. You get used to the night shift, adjust your eating and sleeping so that you don't always feel tired and sick. It starts to grow on you, avoiding the noise and the hustle of the daytime world. But it's easier when you live alone. Carl had lived alone since he moved out of home at age 20, as soon as he graduated from the academy. He'd never been married, not even wanted to. Women weren't something that interested him. They never had been. They were a goddamn puzzle without an answer, the kind he hated. Sexual desire wasn't even something he regularly succumbed to. If the need ever felt pressing, there was always Channel 93 and a box of tissues, but that was rare for Carl. His mind just didn't go to those places all that often, so his body didn't either. He'd gotten used to the loneliness, the quiet, and again it suited working the night shift. But lately he wasn't living alone because Jimmy had moved in.